to the point that you guys got to, it's kind of like, well, PBS kind of works if we have like builder competition, and
it gives MEV to the proposers. It gives some
generous
amount.
Yes,
some generous amount.
That's true. But basically, assuming the block builder competition, why wouldn't there be a competition? And it kind of goes back to my earlier question about should block builders provide services, like, and then like everybody kind of like send them directly the stuff? Is that a bad thing? Is that a good thing? Is that a neutral thing? Yes, somebody from the audience.
So currently couldn't the miners already put their own transactions instead of the flash flood transactions that they receive, and already do the same thing that you're thinking would happen if PBS?
But you wouldn't relay a bundle to an untrusted miner, would you?
Sorry,
you wouldn't relay a bundle to an untrusted miner, would you?
Yes. I mean, would I have a choice?
I mean, you know that it's sort of like it's unsafe. You know, I mean, I wouldn't advise. I mean, I can.
I don't know of any tools that already checks that, so I'm not sure if anyone is actually looking if this already happens. I think it could already happen. It might.
I'm sure they'll get banned. I'm sure they'll get banned if they do that.
And
from the relay network or whatever is relaying the bundles now.
Let's ask that.
So why is the mine is not banned yet?
Sorry, what was the question?
So I said like the miner will be banned.
So like the miner will be banned if he will, like put his transactions in here instead of bundle transaction. But we see sometimes on the Ethermine blocks, like bundles are changed. So why Ethermine is not banned yet?
I don't know. I'm not the guy for this question.
Yeah, actually, I was asking some guy from Facebook.
Yes. Okay. So miner misbehavior, right?
Yeah.
So when we started Flashbots, we launched MEVs. We always knew that it was based on trusted miners. And miners will, at the start be very cooperative. They'll be like, oh great, there's all this additional MEV. And over time figure out other ways to do like subversive behavior that is like more and more difficult to identify. So like, what can we do about it, right? Step one is like you have some code of conduct, some expectations of like how they behave in the platform. Step two is like you have some monitoring to be able to specify if they misbehave, then you have some like punishment, which is like not receiving future transactions from the system and whatnot. It turns out like it's very difficult to spot a lot of misbehavior. Some of that is flagrant, some of them is like maybe more like probabilistic, or like on the transaction, but like maybe depending on like the state of the like pool, like all the different relays they connected to, maybe they received it from somewhere else, blah blah blah. So it becomes extremely difficult to actually monitor. I think probably the best thing that you want is specify a way for searchers or transaction originators to say like which miners they trust sending the transactions to or not. The big question is like, does it make sense to implement this and to like start blacklisting miners between now and the merge in 2 months? And like maybe not, we'll see. But it's like it's a very short timeline to introduce these kind of changes.
Why is it not happening?
I mean, you have the same problem with builders, right?
Oh, the proposers can't look.
Yes.
Actually, something that the peanut guys mentioned to me the other day, which I want kind of you guys' thoughts on. And again, the idea is like, from my perspective, is experimenting and thinking and kind of so. Current thinking on MEV Boost and PBS, etc., is kind of like, well, you send the transactions, maybe directly to them with bundles or whatever. Block Builder kind of like create that, etc. What if, with the idea of empowering users, users could say, oh, I want to make this transaction, okay, the kind of propagate transaction, sometimes like, nobody can take it, this is what I want, and have searchers kind of like pitch to them, kind of like, well, here's a bundle which includes your transaction, and you will get X, and the other guy say, well, you'll get Y, etc. And kind of like, instead of only having a competition towards the validators or the block builders or whoever, also towards the user. So again, going back to the idea that users hold the order flow, can we kind of reverse the direction of the flow, and then the users would receive bundles from which they can choose, countersign it, and then send it, which maybe solve this, if you could do this in an atomic way or something like that, maybe solve this idea of like, well, you can only give it to the block builder or something like that. Wait, Vlad, you talk
I know.
so much, so you're laughing like.
I just want to push back a little bit on the idea that PBS is inherently what pushes users to send their transaction to private parties like builders or avoid the mempool. I mean, today we see that users go through CalSwap or Flashbot Protect or DexGuard. So it's already the case that if you have a transaction that you expect would be exploited, you will send it to some kind of third party that will sequence your transaction or bundle it. The trade-off I see here is these parties might not be decentralized, they could censor you, they could provide you worse qualities of services. So yeah, I just want to make clear that to me it's not a PBS problem, it's more a problem that this exists today. PBS might make it worse because now it sort of entrenches that dynamic, but it's just the natural continuation of what we already see.
So I think you're absolutely right. It's kind of that this is not, it's not about PBS, but it's kind of like we're thinking about kind of like MEV post-merge and where things are going. So is that I don't know if Flashbot we're considering that or is
So this is the order flow question, right? Like, is there a way to allow users to capitalize on the order flow and collect some fees from it? And how you like design the
either
system?
collect fees or like leverage their power one way or another. I'm not sure whether avoid front running or get front run and capture the I don't know, but leverage their ability and power.
You don't have to avoid it actually. Like the like TEEP will raise the same stuff which was done with regular front running. So if it's easy atomic mechanic, like 95, 97, 98% just go with the minor TEEP. So the same stuff, but you just change the variable here to the broadcaster TEEP, and then in this case they will compete. The searchers will compete and
Okay, why would the builder or the validator honor this?
because you still have the gas there. You still have the normal fee here.
Speak up, Vlad. No mic for you. No, you have to shout.
Because
If they have like a contract with them. You know, I mean, so here's my position on this. One of the reasons why this is sort of not really working is because so many builders and searchers are competing in this auction. Basically, I blame the auction mechanism. That's going to be sort of like my take here. The auction mechanism sort of makes it really, really hard to guarantee to anyone that their bundle will be included in any other way, because the one that gets the most MEV will be. And so the auction mechanism makes this race to the bottom competition that takes everyone's MEV away, and also makes it so that unless you can bid the whole amount that they're extracting from you, it's hard to.
So your position is the only way to reduce the amount, or to meet user preferences, is through legal agreements.
No. I'm just saying through a kind of commercial arrangement where instead of there being you produce the work product and then you place it in an auction, they pay you for the work product first, and then you give it to them because and they only pay one because they don't want to. You do the auction first, and then they pay you, and then you produce the result. So there's not that. So there's just a slightly different order of. So it's more contractual than transactional because of the obligation to perform later. But wait a second. I just want to say the high level thing. I think the key thing though is that the auction is a bad search. It needs to be replaced with a good search.
Can you expand just a little bit on why there's no information asymmetry in your model where you're trying to purchase something that you don't know what the value of it is?
I don't understand.
The user is purchasing some agreement that the search will be organized by them, and they're putting some money on the table for the searcher to.
So imagine if the builder or the proposer had from the proposer gave to the builder an advance payment. And then the builder says, "Look, I've got an advance payment. I'm going to be the one who gets in that block. You let me search your thing." And then if you like what they do, they actually have they don't have to compete against the other builders for that height, and so you can sort of sign off on that transaction and know that it's going to be stolen by someone else because they don't have that sort of exclusivity deal for that.
But how do I know that they like what they do? How do I go resolve this information asymmetry?
I mean, we talked about this when you sign the online approval to execute earlier, right? I mean, that's one method. There's lots of different ways that the users can provide additional confirmation as required to take the
Okay, what I'm hearing is like a block space futures market where you can buy future block space and then like retail that however you want. I do wanna like stick to the order flow question. I see someone raising their hand in the back. I haven't seen yet a system where you are able to capture order flow value, return it to the user, and provide good execution and inclusion in a block. And like that is the core problem. How do you return value while also making sure the transaction gets included?
But why would you extract value and then to return it instead of just like not extract the value in the first place? And instead just provide service and help them. The whole time. Instead of trying to redeem yourself later for jacking them. Like jack them and then pay them back. That's weird. Just provide them nice service the whole time.
So because like the tools and the abstractions to do that don't exist, and like the exposure of MEV is there. But it is like a technical problem. It is like a limitation of transaction type definitions. But it's just like, you know, Uniswap is throwing a bunch of MEV in the mempool. And so, you know.
So, no, you're going to get back. I wanted the question exactly. So,
are you want to shout?
Yeah, I can shout. So I just want to double click on that question of how do you allow users to get power and also capture value from your order flow. I'm curious, how do you see the role of wallets playing into that space? I think there was a block that you guys had on this.
It's their fault.
So, exactly. To the users that may not know, how do you see the wallets being able to play in that role? How do you see them being able to make it easier for them to capture value from that order flow? If you could just comment a little bit on that.
Yeah, you know, the wallets could get a lot more creative in the way that they do transaction flow. I think a lot of them are looking now at payment for order flow and they're saying like, hey, look, I can auction off the right to back run these transactions, and it's like free cash flow for me to monetize as a business for a wallet. A lot of the wallets like, okay, everyone's thought like wallets don't have any value, and then all of a sudden MEV exists, and I'm like, wow, we have a great business model. We can just capture all this back running MEV and like make our investors happy. I think a lot of those are like fairly naive and like rely on ideas of like exclusivity, and there'll be like a lot of lack of transparency in the price discovery at which the order flow gets sold off, and like all of these causes issues. I think like what I would love to see is some kind of system where all of the wallets use the same price discovery mechanism for the value of the order flow that is also compatible with providing good execution and inclusion in the blocks. And I've not seen a design build for a system like this yet.
Solidity. It's the solidity.
okay. First of all, to the comment that Vlad made earlier about, well, why not just avoid front running them and not pay them back, just give them good service. It's, from my perspective, it's kind of like the same, and probably, no, it's a, okay, I front run you, I capture some of the value and kind of like that, but then I have to give you 95% for that. Exactly, no, but that's kind of like my point. It's easier to cap, and if they're similar to the block builder, if there is competition on this, then it's kind of, well, a lot of the value would go there. And I'm not sure it's doable at all, I'm not arguing that. But my point is, it would be more economic because of friction. Avoid front running it, avoid paying gas, and just like, okay, just get paid that. So I actually don't think that's the core of the problem. Again, kind of, well, just like the difference between providing service and pay and wreck them and pay them back, potato kind of thing. In terms of, it just makes more sense probably to provide good service. But to the wallets question, I think it's a meaningful question. What can wallets do about it? And wallets are in a really tough position, right? Think about a wallet, and they're good actors, and they want to do the right thing. What is the right thing, right? It's kind of like either to send it out to the world and really kind of like get your users wrecked, or try to give it to somebody, work with somebody on that, but that kind of like make you the waiter didn't see. And you kind of be a kingmaker. Whoever, your MetaMask, whoever you give the transaction to is the winner. They're getting like the most, and etc.
Yeah, I mean, I think the magic is to have the transaction sort of protect itself. Like, you don't want the person you're giving the transaction to have it protected. You want to be able to put it in the mempool, have it go everywhere, and have it be safe everywhere, because sort of when it's executed in the EVM, like, it gives bad MEV unless it's treated well. And so basically imagine if your transaction just like literally like ideally it would be able to have this capability of not being front-run in the way that, for example, okay, it's easy to like check your profit at the end and then revert if you don't have profit, for
But
example.
that's kind of, I don't have futuristic transaction, which wonder what's going to them.
So we basically do already. You'd be surprised. I mean, we do already, kind of. Yeah.
How is that different? Like, you're talking about utilizing the MEV searcher in a good way or something like that. How is that different from me looking at the price of Uniswap and say, well, the price of ETH is $1,500. It might vary, so I'm putting it at $14.95. That's basically, why do I care?
Because you need to be aware of the search and what other transactions are being searched with. What is that sort of? There's a kind of more context that you have when you're in the search than you have when you're in EVM.
You kind of want them to, similar to this bidding thing, so rather than bidding, and I agree with Stefan's point from earlier about, it's not like, yes, we want to be to the users, but then like, how do we provide a good
So
execution?
it is why I clearly concede that's hard.
Say it again?
I mean, I do concede that it's non-trivial and hard to do that. But I don't think it's impossible, and therefore we need to settle for like less, you know?
So,
I agree.
and which takes me a bit to, or a question about that. I mentioned earlier, I assume most people read the post, we have stakers now, right? Stakers are not like miners in the concept that they have a really huge bag for ETH, right? It's kind of like the front-running value. And again, there's MEV and there's front-running and there's not the same. I'm thinking and speaking about front-running as the things which I think we want to mitigate. If there isn't front-running, is ETH going to do better? And it's an open question, or do we have more? Can we leverage that? Is it true at all? I'm sure there are people who disagree that if we get rid of front-running, the price of ETH won't go up. If everybody agrees with me, I'll be super surprised. But going back to the point, yes, maybe you could provide better execution. Can we leverage the validators or the stakers who affect validators somehow to solve this execution problem? Can we bid the users, but now how can we provide them the services? Like, can we somehow incentivize stakers and or validators to do that? I have no idea.
Everyone in this whole search needs to be working for getting MEV in a way that's like good, right? Because ultimately, if you like extract MEV from someone in the way that they can just step, they're gonna figure out how to avoid that, and in the end, sort of you'll all leave it up with anyways the MEV that is like sort of peacefully extractable.
So you think like, well, you're not thinking like searcher and block builder and validator, or
I mean, to me, they're all working together to serve transactions.
Is that possible?
That is MEV search. That is what it is already. It's just that it may not be the most efficient yet.
Yeah, I mean, I have this post called like the MEV supply chain, which introduced like all these different parties that have some activity on top of a transaction that helps a user convert a preference into like a finalized state transition. And so, yeah, I agree. Like all these parties are working in this whole ecosystem, the supply chain of transaction that's helping convert intent into state transitions. And you can actually evaluate the system as a whole and say like, okay, how good or bad is the system by like how much value is captured by users versus how much value is captured by the intermediaries that are providing services to these users. You can also evaluate from the perspective of centralization. So the value that gets created or captured or whatever, how many entities does it like accrue to? Does it accrue to a single entity? How much control does a single entity have? You can start to reason about it as a system for transaction creation.
So I spoke recently with one of the big validator pools or staking pool, whatever you want to think of it. Not a staking pool, but somebody who's running a lot of validators. And their take was very simple. We're going to accept whoever pays us the most. So to the point that I was trying to say, listen, if it's not front-running, the price it's better for the ecosystem, the value of ETH goes up in total, you're actually making more money, and the blunt answer was like, we're just going to take whoever pays us the most. So is he right? Is he wrong? Is it like how do you think validators and stakers should think about it? Like, should they just try to maximize for the users? Especially because a lot of them are aggregators, kind of like MetaMask. Like, the aggregator of a lot of the ETH who's running validators, right? That's your money, right? That's your ETH that you put somewhere, because most of you are not running your own solo validators. And he's trying to do good by you. He's trying to give you all the most ETH. Is he right? Is he wrong?
Yeah. But it's not up to like them to figure out how to make that a good thing for everyone. It's up to like us, right? Like there's sort of like people who are involved in sort of organizational tasks, who are tasked with making sure that people that like profit making is good for everyone. You know, like greed is good is a hard institutional arrangement to maintain, and it doesn't come for free. Like the cost of energy can be very high sometimes. So you need like organize to make it so the cost of energy is not super high. That like greed is good, which is it's a task not for validators, not for users, but for like sort of like the kind of minds that we have here, literally. They're all responsible.
Responsibility airdrop.
I was thinking, well, this like we did one session twice as long as I was originally thinking, but I was hoping to get more thoughts and questions and discussion from the audience.
Can I ask a question to the audience? And maybe is there a way for builders to commit to be ethical? Like, can you make a block and prove to your users or to prove to validators who will try to include you that your block doesn't contain front running or back running or bad things that you want to blacklist? Is that always possible?
Not synchronously, but asynchronously, sure.
You can check after the fact.
Yeah, you can do like a fraud proof. You say like, I will not sandwich. And then if the data is available, you can see if they do and tax them, and you could commit bidders or searchers to like having some kind of escrow as access or withhold their wages. So you say like, we will only release the profits from the bribe or whatever after we verify you have not sandwiched.
So if you're an ethical builder, would you commit to put 100 ETH in a pot and burn them if you are found to have
I think that's probably a bad economic model, because it's like, how much is the art worth?
Yeah, right.
It might be worth it just to burn it to get more.
Right, you're limiting the amount. Yeah.
So I want to ask on this. Like we're thinking something very similar. We said like, oh, we're going to run a good block builder, and we're going to work with others. But first of all, it goes back to the original question: do we even want this? And we're seeing some interest from some actors, but number one, like, forget about is it doable? Do we want it?
You mean people in this room or like the whole world?
But people in this room is a pretty good, I think, like sampling of like the Ethereum community and where the community wants to go.
Okay.
Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Like even before the technical question about it, do we want to achieve it?
So
wait, what?
I'll reframe the question because I think it's useful to put some technical limitation on what is actually achievable. So, can you come up with a smart contract where block builders put some stake and some oracle that says, here's a set of programmatic conditions that if they are met, the stake gets burned? Yes, you can build this. Is it useful at achieving the intended outcome of providing a better user experience for end user? My time is not.
Isn't it just going back to having validators?
I don't think that there's a way to encode rules over transaction ordering in this framework, in this technical framework, that actually like significantly improves the user experience.
But it's a good thing we're not limited to code, right? It's a good thing we don't have to codify everything that we do. It's a good thing that it's impossible even to govern like that. Like it doesn't, it's not the case that like the law or governance or anything can be, anything really complex or requiring complex social judgment can be.
But programming,
even within like the world of computer science, there's lots of stuff that's understandable. Like, and if you go into the world of like politics and law, all of a sudden, like the idea that you're going to write like a code that's going to figure this out, so that you don't need to think and have judgment, is sort of naive, right? We need to have judgment and not have code.
So we have a high council of MEV that decides whether
the high council.
I mean, you're smiling, but you're on that high council here, looking down at us.
Good mic drops all around. But I want to your point, I totally agree that technically it's very hard. Maybe it's possible economically in terms of can we align incentives? And I don't think smoothing is the best result for anything. But like you know roughly per year how much money you'll make, or roughly like that. Like maybe it's possible, maybe it's not. I'm not sure. But do we all want to even try to achieve that? Because from the first day, I thought the answer was almost no. We don't want to remove front
The
rank.
original sin.
And a follow but if you're talking about like slashing, like doesn't that kind of like undo PBS? Basically, make the new like does PBS provide something in that case, or do you just have new validators really? Or is it different? Am I missing a point?
So you're saying like implementing these restrictions, these rules?
Yeah, even if we kind of like could have, and then well, you put ETH and you kind of well, like don't you just and they're slashing and whatnot? Aren't you just going back to the model of validators and stake and slashing?
I don't think it does. I mean, the validator doesn't have to do the extraction themselves, and they still get blocks from builders, possibly containing whatever you would call good MEV that they couldn't extract themselves as validators or wouldn't have the capabilities to.
Is it really the responsibility of builders to define what is good MEV and what is bad MEV? Or is it the responsibility of applications and the application layer, like exchanges, aggregators and things like that? Should they really be minimizing the MEV that users are exposed to? Like, why do the builders have to do this? Should the builders not just maximize value for the people that they're giving the blocks to, the proposers?
What do people think?
I mean, I think I get that. To a large extent, I agree with that in the sense that it's the responsibility of that builder to essentially figure out how to protect the users as opposed to optimize and block them all twice. So, and I think one simple way, at least for this trading, is you can use cryptographic signatures that require every trade to be pre-signed, what gets included in the block, which basically means even if your miner has the last block, that they can't really do anything about it. So you essentially solve that anyway. So that's one way to go about it, in which case you're essentially protecting your user against all MEV attacks. It's just a...
I just want to say, I totally
Wait, Vlad, there's somebody in the crowd
I can't see that.
There was a hand.
Sorry.
So users are paying for execution. They want top of block just like searchers, or they want whatever they want. And the question is like, how do you distinguish between a user legitimately wanting that execution versus someone sandwiching? Like if you use DKG, like Osmosis or Dev just released a paper and it says like, oh, everyone has to pay like max gas, and we still reorder, but we don't bleed order flow, right? That's great, and you can still order, you can still pay for priority, right? Without being sandwichable. But the question is like, is it from the user's perspective or from the searcher's perspective? The truth is that I think protocols want usage, and that means they have to have efficient execution at some point. So if you go like is someone here the zero MEV guy? No.
He said he couldn't make it.
Okay. The zero MEV guy says, oh, we should randomize the transaction orders. So everyone gets shit execution no matter what. Or everyone who doesn't spam gets shit execution. So from his perspective, it's like better for the user, but like which fucking user? Like someone who literally doesn't care when their order is executed, which is maybe not who's going to be the next wave of adoption.
I think he came back on this randomization thing. Now there's a content layer which is a bit more...
The content layer randomizes per chunk.
Per chunk?
Per chunk, yeah.
Not through the whole block, right? It's
No,
like
the block is split into chunks, and within the chunk, it's randomized.
Right. Yeah. That doesn't seem I haven't looked at it for a while. But I just wanted to mention that when you do like DKG, once the transactions are decrypted in the post state of the block, there can still be a lot of arbitrage in the block,
right.
Which in a model where the proposer is naive and is unable to run sophisticated routing algorithms or whatever, they might not be able to exploit that arbitrage. And so even there, PBS makes sense to surface the optimal, let's say, arbitrage between these trades. So, again, trade-offs.
Privacy alone isn't able to fulfill all user preferences. So you can still see a future where, okay, you have a fully private transaction pool, and you just like assume, you say, okay, you send your transaction to this RPC, and it will be included and finalized without anyone else seeing it. Someone else can still come around and say like, okay, well, I'm willing to pay for you to send it to me before I send it to this RPC. And so there's like a whole set of preferences that doesn't capture that like makes it not necessarily compatible with it.
SGX. So if you just route it through SGX and nobody can see it.
Depends what happens in the SGX.
And the reorgs after.
And the reorgs after.
Also.
Yeah.
More privacy has
the finalization.
Oh no, you have to wait for finally. You can have a conf before the conf. Just from a trusted searcher in a world where there isn't this crazy race. Sorry. Anyways, all I was going to say is, I think it's really important that we don't try to define who defines like what's a good MEV and bad MEV. You know, I think there's sort of like, you know, like sort of like the brilliance of like law a lot of the times that we have conflict and we don't need to have this on basic stuff. And I think we can get through all of this. Just empowering users and never deciding like what's good and bad. Just sort of having people respond to the like transactions and asks and all the rest of the bonds and situations that are happening in that MEV switch.
So I would say that if you actually do have transaction privacy, that probably eliminates a lot of the bad MEV. And you don't have to judge like what exactly is good or bad.
Well, what about the good MEV? You're gonna throw the baby out with the bathwater?
Well, every user can still decide for themselves if they want to send it to like some other person and leak their information. But by default, they would just not leak any information.
But don't you? If you go for privacy, and maybe explain it, if you go for privacy, doesn't that introduce the incentive? I'll just spam transactions which try to capture value in all sorts of like ways, and they'll try and fail and try and fail a million times, but like some of them will randomly hit in positions which are valuable, and I'll extract value from that, and now you're incentivizing spamming. Is that, do you agree or disagree? Or?
Yeah, possible. I would say maybe it's so unlikely that you actually hit something that it's not a problem. But
we have searchers in the crowd, like who know what they know. Like, can somebody provide that? I think it's wrong, but I think we're like we're doing that.
We have a hand first.
If you look at like the like Phantom, Avalanche, or Polygon, just like the Ether scanning for those, you can tell the majority of block space is used by these spam transactions.
Right, but there the transactions, like the user transactions, are known, right? You know what you're trying to spam for.
Yeah, you spam after seeing high value.
Exactly. So if you actually don't even have any information about where the value is, I would say that makes it different.
You're just pushing the value into the next block then. You just have exactly the same spam going on one block later. And then it becomes impossible to give that value back to the user in any way because you can't do that atomically.
Okay. But I would say that then you do actually kind of have a like even playing field if it's in the next block, and everyone can just like pay whatever amount they want to be at the top of the block, but then that's different than if they're paying differently.
I can say that in specifically like Solana, you're seeing a lot of like trades, USDC for USDC, just trading all sorts of stuff to see if it works. So spamming transactions, they're cheap. Okay, like it's not cheap in Ethereum, but it's cheap like in somewhere. And there is an incentive to spam. You don't know what's out there, but you have a smart contract which tries to extract value. Kind of like just figure out all sorts of routes. Yeah. So that I think is the disadvantage of privacy, that it introduces the incentive to spam.
In the context of privacy, spamming makes sense when you're trying to arb a price movement, and it doesn't make sense when you're trying to arb or sandwich a user which is just making a trade because they have to pay their landlord in DAI, and so the noisy trader kind of user. Maybe you eliminate that part, but you still don't eliminate the arbitraging these price movements.
Questions from the audience? More comments, more questions. Yeah.
You see a lot of descriptions of MEV being invisible tax, and with the current system. It seems like everyone kind of describes MEV right now as an invisible tax, which kind of it taxes at different rates because if you're one of the unfortunate souls to put forth a horrible transaction that loses all your money, you're basically funding the security of the chain, and you get a way higher tax than someone else. Do you think that eventually users will push back against this like non-equal taxation system and start using their asymmetry and knowing their transactions to take some of that back? Or do you see that miners and staking pools will always have the power to be able to prevent that from happening?
I would say it's the broad theme of what we are trying to do is to give back that power to the user. You can call it a tax or it's just straightforward theft, sometimes we would call it. So yeah, you don't want the user to lose money because of something that happens.
Do you think LPs are going to be
Louder, so.
Do you think that LPs are going to miss out on the funds that they get from sandwich tax? Like LPs usually lose money on Uniswap, osmosis. They're kind of bribed by the protocol with inflation, which is kind of a stupid idea. You know, like if that inflation goes away, the revenue goes away, the liquidity goes away, and then execution gets just as bad, right? So you could have like every attack gets sandwiched, low liquidity pool, huge slippage, bad execution, or like sufficient liquidity in the pool that the slippage and the MEV tax that the last guy mentioned, right, so low no one gives a fuck. So how do you balance those overlapping incentives?
Is that what Tarun's paper is?
So I want to make a comment on this. So can I?
Thanks.
When you're talking really about AMMs, right? It's kind of like which kind of like Uniswap is so big and it has so much liquidity. We're kind of like using it for two things, right? For price discovery on one hand, because it has liquidity, right? I trust that this is actually the right price. Otherwise, it would have already moved, right? And the second thing is to actually do the trading. Varun could comment on that because that's kind of like what they're aiming to work on and solve. But I'm not sure if AMMs are necessarily the primitive to solve for.
Okay, so said another way. Say it's like a savage attack. Say it's just like jump on two sides in two venues, and they are adding liquidity specifically for you. So, like for the user, I want execution. I want a price. What is the price? Is it what's available in the pool? Is it what jump gives me? Like, what's the difference?
So, I mean, generally the price discovery happens on CeFi venues anyway, right? So essentially, you're seeing the price discovery happen on, say, Binance, and then people are using that as a price reference. And then people are using that as a price reference to do arbitrage against the AMM pairs. So you could argue that price discovery is happening based on what market makers quote on these DeFi venues.
Right.
So which, when you say who sets the price, it comes down to the jump or the winter meets the world, right?
Exactly.
So,
but I would argue that it's better to pay MEV tax to the protocol, to LPs, than to jump.
Oh, but it doesn't matter, right? So because if you are paying a tax a market maker, you're essentially getting a better execution, and you can price any asset that you cannot price using an AMM. You also don't have to worry about slippage that you would typically see if you use an AMM. And you also don't have to worry about MEV or sandwich attacks because the quote is already agreed upon, right? And it's pre-signed.
Yeah.
So.
But I think it's a good point to say, okay, this is a tax, and I think we want to wrap up because like I think you're but we're paying tax, as the guy mentioned, kind of that for the network. It might make a lot of sense to try to have that tax directed elsewhere. Whether that's LPs, whether like I don't know which actor, but basically like, but which brings, I have a problem with this approach at the high level, which is basically say let's let the dApp solve it, right? Let's somebody building on top of the L1 build. So Varun is kind of okay with quotes and whatnot. It could be any system out there that is kind of like allow the user to get that, and it can't get front, right? Because it's a quote, like kind of both sides cited. This is the transfer itself. Is it a good idea, do you think? I have a sense, and maybe I'm wrong, I have a sense that we want it solved on L1, otherwise it needs to be solved everywhere else all the time. That's my thing. So like everything you make is going to be complex because you need to solve for it. But maybe I'm wrong. I don't know what you guys think. Do we actually need to solve it on the L1 or should...
I mean, my answer would be application specific, and for trading, if you don't need to make L1 changes. I think, I guess in my opinion, the least changes to make an L1, the better. And if you get to solve possibly the application layer, then just do that, right? So on the other hand, maybe it depends on the application itself, right? So in the context of trading, it's much easier to solve that as the application layer itself. But maybe for something else, it could be different.
Barnaby, what do you think? Or you don't have a take?
I don't really have thoughts on this, but no, I don't. So. I need to think about it. It was a long question. It's been a long day.
Yeah, I mean, I think even without any changes to the Ethereum semantics today, the way we understand transactions can change, the way this rewrites validity can change, in a way that, in practice, radically changes the semantics of applications and transactions. And so, to my mind, the future is sort of like, smart transactions, smart apps that are like MEV aware, and they're going to be actually simpler and much more elegant in many ways than we have apps today. Because they're taking advantage of the search, you can sort of outsource a lot of the code to the search, actually. There's a lot of cases where a non-deterministic program that like magically can look at the end of the trace can execute much better than another kind of program.
So
right?
do you and Steph kind of like agree that the DApp should be aware of MEV regardless? We can't avoid that. In your world, I think it's kind of what's going to utilize it or whatever. In Steph's world, feel free to correct me, I'm phrasing it wrong. But it's kind of, it exists there, it is more of a thread category. How do I create it? Well, you're not just going to send your Uniswap transaction out because you're going to get it correct. You should be more mindful about like creating it, etc. But both of you agree that the application there must be aware of it?
So I think protecting the users happens at the application layer. That's where people are competing for users. I think there is some risk that there's perverse incentives where if application layers or wallets start to monetize through MEV, that they are no longer incentivized to protect the users as much. Like a very I guess cynical take on like why is there so much sandwiching happening on Ethereum is that it allows Uniswap to triple the volume that they have on their AMM, and since volume is like the key success metric for LP fees, then there's very little incentive to like prevent sandwiching for Uniswap until there's an alternative that like takes all the users, etc. So I think ultimately competition at the application level is what's going to provide better outcome for the users rather than like fundamental changes to L1. I do think, however, there's a way to accelerate that by providing better tools and better abstractions for app developers to reason about MEV, and that mostly takes the shape of event transaction types, like what levels.
And that's kind of like, you think is where we're heading? Again, you and Vlad seem to be up like on the I thought you were like on both sides.
No, we are disagreeing.
That is kind of, okay, because whether that's MEV boost or even, but basically the ability to create more sophisticated like primitives, which you couldn't do otherwise. I don't know if it's POS or I don't know if it's PBS. Like.
My claim is that you can build this on top of MEV boost. His claim is that you can.
Yeah. No, but first,
but either way, you want to build
this is because of the proposer-builder separation issue, actually. Yes and no. I mean, I think the difference is sort of like the way we organize it, and maybe also the sort of use cases that we have in our minds when we're thinking about this. Like, in like the Flashbots world, they think a lot more about arbitrage than sort of like what I'm thinking about. Where I'm thinking much more about like relatively like basic things, like I want my transaction not to. It's somehow more. I may be thinking about different use cases and organizing in a different way. But I think like the ultimate, like similar goals, especially like what we think would be nice in the model. I don't know about assessments about what's possible. And there's also toolboxes that are totally different also. Like I'm happy to reach into the crypto law toolbox.
The crypto what?
Law.
Crypto law.
Yes.
So great discussion. I want to basically, I'm like kind of new to this MEV space, but it sounds like some of the things you guys mentioned may be solvable if there's a healthy competition even among block builders, possibly sounds like. But I'm not as familiar with like what the latest status with like the block builder ecosystem is. So if anyone can kind of explain what the latest ecosystem is.
I would like, to the best of my knowledge, I think like Flashbots are running.
So it doesn't exist today, is the answer. At the merge, we'll see. It'll probably be early, and I expect that everyone will try block building. Eventually, people will realize that their blocks aren't really competitive and like aren't getting included. And then there will be some like emergence of like some more prominent block builders that are more successful. I do think that it will enable a lot of innovation at the transaction type level. And I think this is like unlocking this innovation is going to be like a pretty fundamental change to the type of applications that you can build on Ethereum. And I look forward to like seeing that evolve over the next year. I think it's very difficult to predict what are the changes going to be on the transaction type level, but yeah, there'll be just like an explosion of different parties that try to do that.
Maybe reversing the question, how do researchers think of their relationship with future leaders? Who will you get in touch with? Who will include the vendors? What do you foresee?
Or will building even exist? Or will it be a partial
Assuming building exists, and you, which partial builder will you?
yeah, which partial builder? That's that. Although I think it could be a better name. Partial builder. Anyways.
So it's cool that if there's multiple builders in a lot of these cases can try out in parallel.
But the cost of anarchy is real when there's multiple builders.
People didn't hear this first.
So there's all these ideas of what is good and bad MEV, and these can be tried out in parallel by using different builders. Right? Then the market will figure out what gets included. When users get tired of like privacy of not getting shit executed, they'll go to flash bots, or they'll probably concentrate into bigger builders will benefit from network effects. The more stuff that happens in your block, right, the easier it is to get a high fee, the easier it is to get accepted. That said, there are like still a lot of competing ideas that need to like try out in the open market. So I guess that HyperDAO zero-sum game at some point. There's only one block that's going to get finalized. But at the other side, like, there are a lot of different pieces that are trying out in parallel. So like there's some people that just will never use flash bots for whatever reason. Maybe it's personal, or maybe they don't like the execution semantics, so they'll never use bloXroute. I don't know. People decide. But on the other side, like the competition is not between builders; it's between builders and proposers, the person that actually bribe. Because at some point, all the builders' revenue is going to get eaten by all their surplus is going to get eaten by the miner. So there's almost like incentive there to I don't know if you guys, what you guys are actually thinking.
I mean, I'm just asking naive questions to tease out some answers, but if you're a researcher and you have a bundle, will you send it to multiple block builders, partial builders?
So I would, when we were thinking about it internally, like, okay, what we know, like, we're thinking, like, okay, we run a block builder, sure. And then we kind of like said, yeah, can we run a good block builder that doesn't front run? And I don't know if it would succeed or not. We spoke to some validators. There seemed to be interest in that. Like that's a second thing. But then we kind of like thought, would searchers give their bundles to other block builders, or really searchers too? Right? You have searcher teams who become now also block builders. Would they send bundles to one another? So I feel like, okay, we're in a good spot because that's not our bread and butter. But is there an issue there, or not? Like, I'm curious for the takes.
So just by comparison, like if you look at like ad networks, like DoubleClick and AppNexus and Rubicon and stuff like that, where there is this sort of supply and demand and market dynamic in between, all of them will buy and sell to each other. Right? Like if someone will aggregate over it, and then there's just like a price difference that, I guess in our field, will be experienced through changes in execution. Imagine a bundle that will say like, oh, we'll try and do it our way, but then use flashbots based on some criteria, or whatever, and aggregate over them. Or they will sell excess supply at a lower rate to someone else. Right? So there'll be like a complex emergence in the field of preferences that will compose these things.
I mean, I totally agree that the market's going to be complex, but the reason that I want to push back, the main thing that I want to push back on is against the idea that, like, you know, competition in this context isn't necessarily going to be cost-free. Like, the reason why, for example, all the MEV goes to the proposer in this assumption is because of this sort of race to the bottom competition between searchers in the auction. You know, the builders are set up to do that same race to the bottom, and then the searchers are set up to probably do the same race to the bottom behind the builders too, and also between them also. And so there's kind of like, I think there's a great deal of inefficiency actually from this organization, because basically you produce the work product, and then only one of the pieces of product gets chosen as like the winning product, and all the rest of it is wasted. I think that there's much more efficient ways to organize that has much less waste, and where there's basically like it's more like search organization and less like here, give me your results and I'll choose one.
Okay, so your take is, okay, we could do better if they don't just compete with one another, but somehow collaborate with one another or something like that. But it sounds like, it sounds, at least your belief, and it actually makes sense, that block builders are competing with one another, Proposer will take up that, and searchers will compete behind the block builders, and there's going to be a competition. Why would there be a competition between block builders? Like, everybody are going to start that. Like, why?
Well, if the proposer says, I'll take your block or your
Well,
block.
wait, I'm curious for Stefan's take on this, because like, I'm worried a bit that there's not going to be, because like, you're well positioned, we're well positioned, but I'm not sure that the MEV searchers, unlike AdClick or whatnot, if you take somebody's bundle, or like one, Team A and Team B, and Team A gives a bundle to Team B, well, these are great trends, we should be doing that. So I originally at least thought that there'll be an issue there, and therefore not a lot of actors. I'm not sure, like, I think Stefan thinks differently, so I'm very curious to hear, like, why do you think this will be different? Why do you think there's going to be a lot of competition?
Yeah, your question is like builder centralization.
Yeah.
I just want to highlight, I love how Vlad is describing these things, like the high council of MEV, and then like central MEV resource planning of like making sure everything's optimal. I just can't wait to have like a centralized planning for all.
Well, it's better than bundle theft.
Better than like
better than reorgs so that they can steal the bundles they couldn't steal while you were hiding them, etc., etc. So I just think the bundle theft thing is so inefficient. I mean, you can't even use it for certain applications because of the small chance that your bundle will get stolen. Even if it's small, it's very serious to have your bundle stolen.
What do you think like the centralized planning gets away from that?
Bundle protection? I don't understand. So if you tell two searchers that you might take their search result for the next block, then you can take something from one of them and give it to the other and include it in that block, valid way to implement. And so it's like it's hard for you to promise one searcher that you're not going to steal from them if they don't know that their bundle is going to be included.
And finalized, like again, with reorg protection.
No, just one block.
But you can give this. You can give this with just privacy.
Oh, yeah, but sorry, the reorg. Yeah, I mean, but the reorg protection is sort of like another thing.
Okay. Alright. To get back to your question.
If you're on the council, you get like cool votes and everything.
Yeah, that's what I want to know. Like, when our meeting is going to start happening, Vlad?
I mean, I'm not part of the council.
Everybody on the council says they're not part of the
Okay. Builder centralization. So my take is within a couple of years, block building is going to be super commoditized. And it's much more of an order flow problem than it is like anything that the block builder does. So, the big incentive for block building is to try to acquire exclusive order flow and be able to like take these opportunities and capture them for yourself. Try to integrate vertically on the supply chain up to like the user level, right? Like Wintermute like launching their Bebop exchange to be able to have exclusive order flow, or down to the validator, which is like jump like acquiring service one to be able to eliminate validators, right? So there's like a huge incentive like to be able to have the most control over the supply chain. But if you're able to solve the order flow question, and that's like how meeting user preferences in a way that doesn't require exclusivity in routing, then block building becomes extremely commoditized.
So do you think? So first of all, I think that's a great take. If we can solve for that, then we're in a very good position.
What if it's the proposer's job to do that? What if the proposer is the only person to solve that?
So that means
I'm open to it.
Okay, but that gets rid of the builder role partially.
It doesn't get rid of it. It just says it's co-located.
No. You can't have them be separate and co-located. That's not separate.
No. Okay, not co-located. But so there's this like a builder role is just a power difference, right? Like you're taking away the block construction from the duty of validating.
But you're moving it away by more than a few milliseconds, like latency between them, right? You're not talking about like putting them in the same. Like they're not talking about like two different programs on the same hardware, right? We're talking about like two computers that are separated by the internet, right?
In cursive MEVs, yes.
Okay, but in the future you want like every proposer to be co-located with a builder?
I mean, that's how it happens regardless. So like, let's say that you even do block construction at the validator level, right? Like you can, run like your algorithm for block building like within your node, which is like how Geth works normally, and it has a very simple heuristic for transaction level. I would say that's like a co-located builder and paladin.
I would say that's not separated. Like the proposer and the builder have not been separated. They're both in depth. They're both like not. They're not separated in that case.
The separation is what? Just like a standard API?
No, the separation is.
Can I understand how we? I'm not going to this. I asked, well, if we find a solution to the order flow, then really, okay, block building get commoditized because like there is no anybody could do it, etc. People compete on that. So if we solve the order flow problem, then we're kind of good. Instead, like currently there's a strong incentive. You know, you want the MetaMask and the block builder and the value really throughout the thing and kind of to be as good as possible or as profitable as possible. And then you guys went haywire. So I lost how that and how do we solve potentially maybe direction. I don't know if you have takes on like how solving the order flow problem. So how do you go from that to the co-location question?
The proposer should be solving this problem. The proposer should decide whether this transaction is going to be included right away or whether it goes off to the search. And so the co-location question starts to become really important. Like the proposer is deciding whether to take your transaction.
So transactions goes directly to all proposers.
Well, goes to the proposer.
Okay, but you said either go to the proposer or go to the search.
Okay, so imagine the proposer is doing this role that we're talking about.
The proposer what?
The proposer is doing this role of conducting the order flow.
Okay.
And says some of them go to the searcher, some of them go to this builder, some of them just go straight into the block.
So direct connection from the user from that to, no, but how does it? If it's just a mempool, then everything goes to the search.
Yeah, but, I mean, the point is that like no, because like the proposer decides, at least in this model, like what gets in their block. They can see their block in these models, so they can decide what's in there.
So regular mempool, transaction propagate as usual. Proposer chooses some transactions go this way, and others kind of give it to the searcher to try to optimize or whatnot something.
Yeah. So and then the question of builder proposer separation starts to become sort of core to this because like because then if the proposer is supposed to not see the block, they can't do it anymore. If they can't actually do this task, they can't look inside the block. And so then instead the builder has to do it. Right? And then the builder has to be this sort of route.
But why would it still missing? It's kind of like
okay, so
it's wait. Transactions propagate goes to everyone. Why would the proposer say, "Oh, this transaction go through and everything else goes through"?
Because those ones are
rather than everything go to the search because it maxes MEV and it makes more money.
No, it makes more money to include some transactions faster because they care about this timestamp, which only the proposer can give, for example.
So then we see.